Hey everyone, RogueGold here, welcome back to the Division 2, and today I've got quite the interesting rabbit hole dive to take you all on. So I want to make very clear from the beginning of this video, I'm going to show you two interesting bits of news within this. The rest of the video is full on theory and speculation based off of those things. As per usual, I wouldn't make this video or share those theories if I thought that they had no legitimate chance of happening, but still, I just want to make very clear what this is. But between a teaser that we got regarding future Division franchise milestones and some behind the scenes news at Massive, this whole ongoing mystery that we've had lately with the teaser of snow content, the presence at Gamescom, and more may be starting to piece together. So we'll get straight into it. If you enjoyed the video and you want to stay up to date on everything with the Division 2, then be sure to click that subscribe button if you're not already. And then, as always, major shout out and thank you to our channel members. I would not be able to keep making these without you. Thank you so much. But without further ado, let's get to this. Alright, so all of this began yesterday with the release of United in the Division. If you don't know, this was a mini documentary that Ubisoft cut together showcasing snippets of the studio tour that the developers of the game hosted back in April, where myself and other creators and members of the community got the amazing opportunity to travel to Sweden. I thought this thing was very well shot and edited. It was quite cool to relive the whole experience through that. I will link the documentary down below in case you missed it. I do recommend watching beyond just seeing the behind the scenes of that stuff. There were some nice comments put in there and affirmations from the team regarding their commitments to communication with the community, as well as stuff like taking critical feedback and more. But what really stuck out to me and why I wanted to bring this whole thing up was the final text slide that they show at the very end of the video. This was it right here, and it reads, "From DC to Brooklyn, your fight defines this world. Battle for Brooklyn was a major milestone, and it could not have happened without you, agents. With 10 years of the Division on the horizon, the next chapter for the Division 2 is already in motion." Now, firstly, damn, your fight defines this world? That kind of hit me in the feels a little bit. But the last line there is really what struck me. Now, at first, due to the wording of it, I was like, did they just commit to another decade of Division content? But no, they're acknowledging that in just about 7 months from now, the Division franchise will be turning 10 years old, as it will mark the 10th anniversary of the release of Tom Clancy's The Division 1 back in March 2016. Now, this is a milestone that I've seen some in the community bring up before. I've seen people theorize before that they might commemorate it by launching a Division 1 remaster or remake, maybe even go further and restart Division 1 content. I personally don't believe that either of those things are going to happen. Unfortunately, I could probably get into an entire video about why, but there are a couple of pretty interesting things about this final tag. Firstly, just the acknowledgement and teaser for the 10th anniversary, right? It's July 2025 right now. We've still got a ways to go. So it's interesting for them to shout that out now. There's also some level of inherent expectation for there to be some kind of a celebration or commemoration. A lot of games or franchises that are live like this that go on for many years usually do something pretty big for the 10th anniversary. But also what keeps nagging at me is how they've linked the two events within this sentence, right? They didn't say, hey, the franchise is turning 10 and we're working on more Division 2 stuff. They said, with 10 years of the Division on the horizon, the next chapter for the Division 2 is already in motion. Now again, to be clear, this is me speculating. I could be making a big deal out of this for no reason, take that as it is, but that phrasing and the linking of those two things catches my eye. It's also pretty curious that they say the next chapter is in motion. What does that mean? Another season? Seems kind of doubtful, right? I think a lot of us knew that another season was coming since we're in year 7, season 1. In fact, it reminded me of another pretty interestingly phrased teaser that we got recently, that being the infamous by now snow picture. So this was released a month ago, back in June, and their message at the time read, "Agents, thank you so much for joining the Battle for Brooklyn. The team is working on the next update as well as starting something entirely new in the Division 2. So, since that was released, a lot of speculation from the community has gone into when we will actually see whatever this is teasing. Right, when will it release in-game? It seems pretty likely that we can rule out Year 7 Season 2, also known as the next somewhat fast-approaching update, given their post makes the distinction between working on the next update and starting something entirely new. There's also been a fair amount of speculation that's gone into what exactly something entirely new means, but I'll tell you what, it sure sounds similar to me to the next chapter for the Division 2 that they just referenced in this documentary. So, where am I going with all of this? What I'm saying is that the snow teaser last month cryptically made it sound like something substantial, something all new that this game has never done before, hence their wording. 1 month later, this documentary now highlights that the next chapter of the game is in motion on a video that is heavily revolving around the DLC release, which was a major chapter itself, and loosely linking that to a random shoutout that the franchise's 10th anniversary is approaching. We also learned very recently that the snow teaser, whatever it is, will be fully revealed at Gamescom next month, as the Division team will be attending. That itself is pretty notable, given that this is their first attendance in years. The last time they were there is close to when the Division 2 launched. And while it is not impossible, I've talked about in a few recent videos how it seems unlikely that they would choose to do that and invest the resources to be there if it was just for them to announce a minor weather change update, if that's truly what this was, right? So all over the place in these recent weeks, there's just been a lot of very oddly noteworthy and abnormal teasers that have been consistently dropping. Now, to quickly sidestep all of that stuff, one big question that has been pretty fairly asked since we got the snow teaser is that if this snow content teaser, whatever, is meant to be some kind of significant content, who exactly has been working on it, right? We know pretty well by now what the limitations of this current development team are, and it was all hands on deck for them to work on the DLC right up until its release. They very publicly had to delay it at the start of the year since they just needed a bit more time to work on it. Now, at the same time, it has been said for years that not doing snow in the Division 2 is not just a creative decision, but because of the engine changes that they had to make to the Division's Snowdrop engine going into the Division 2, that would make it also a pretty big technical challenge to make snow a reality. The game just simply wasn't designed to do it, right? And I've been told by people in the past who would know that it would be a pretty huge task to do. So for them to come out less than a month after this huge DLC project shipped, suddenly confirming that snow content is coming, how did they suddenly jump that hurdle with their resources? Well, here enters the other key bit of news that we learned yesterday in regards to Massive Entertainment, the lead Division 2 development studio. This comes courtesy of the Insider Gaming podcast. I will link that down in the description in case you want to look at it. But this was put together and guest starred by Tom Henderson, who, if you don't know, is a very reputable industry insider and leaker. He has had plentiful amounts of correct Ubisoft information in the past, so while you should always take leaks with a grain of salt, this seems pretty legitimate. And in this week's podcast, he shared a very interesting tidbit. Check this out.
And leaping back to the Star Wars thing and cancellations, again, I am working on a book about cancelled video games, but these don't really have big stories behind them. But they also recently cancelled Star Wars Outlaws 2 because that was planned and in the works. But it wasn't like it didn't enter production for as much as I know. It wasn't really like
so it's still in like the pre-production. Like
it was very, very, very early. But
we're probably 7 years away from seeing it.
Yeah. But they looked at Outlaws 2 and thought, let's not do that. But yeah, just some interesting stuff.
So, in case you're not making the correlation or seeing the significance here, Star Wars Outlaws was a title made by Ubisoft Massive. Specifically, it was made primarily by the old Division team that made Division 1 and 2. They were moved to work on that project after Warlords of New York dropped back in 2020, and it was after that transition when Yannick and a few others went to rebuild the Division 2's development team with Ubisoft Bucharest. Now, Outlaws itself was the primary roadblock for Ubisoft and Massive to begin really working on the Division 3. Work on that game did not really begin until Outlaws released last year, and so we knew at the time that many of those devs were coming back to the Division franchise to start working on the Division 3, but it did seem as though Massive was going to continue the trend that they set when they were working on Avatar and Star Wars concurrently and do two major projects at the same time, and this was evident by them hiring for several positions on an unannounced project, which was alongside the Division 3 listings. The thing is though, I can't go and show you those now because I would say 6-ish weeks ago, any of those listings that were still up suddenly vanished. And as of right now, if you go to Massive's website, there are 0 open positions for anything. even on The Division 3. Now, in that podcast segment, Henderson doesn't specifically clarify that Star Wars Outlaws 2 was in development with Massive, but I think it makes pretty logical sense that if it were being worked on, it was indeed with them, and that would then make the most amount of sense for that unannounced project that they were hiring for. And when those listings were still up, they included big roles like game director, other senior roles. That would make a good amount of sense since those people who were in those positions on Outlaws 1 came back to start working on The Division 3. So here is where all of this ties together. I'm sorry, I know it took us a minute to set everything up, but what if Outlaws 2 got canceled in these recent weeks or months? That suddenly then freed up who knows how many people at the studio, and instead of them just shipping everyone off to go work on The Division 3 or another project, they decided finally to reinforce the Division 2 team, even if it was just for a temporary position. But perhaps they did that with the goal of pulling off some kind of major or substantial snow update and content for the game, right? This was a feature that was said to be previously very hard to do. Technically, it was announced to us on a timeline that didn't make that much sense given the DLC's release. This would help explain both of those things immensely. So my theory is that if that is true, since we know that the snow content likely is not coming with this soonest approaching season, what if, as a franchise celebration and homage to The Division 1, they've decided to schedule and drop it with the final season of Year 7 in March of 2026, on or right around the 10th anniversary of the Division franchise. And to begin building hype for this, they're going to tease that update and content at Gamescom next month. Something that big, that coordinated, and that memorable would absolutely fit the bill for The Division 2's next chapter, as teased in the documentary, and I think this train of thought begins to answer a lot of those logistics questions that were lingering. To be explicitly clear, none of that is confirmed, and everything except the two news bits that we looked at in this video have been my own speculation and my own personal theory, but if this turns out to be true, even just partially so, I think that would be very, very exciting. Well, there you go, folks. That is my latest wacky theory for you all. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you were able to see at least some of the logic there. But I've yapped enough at this point. I would love to know all of your guys' thoughts. Do you think there is any chance of all this stuff coming true? Am I completely crazy? Or are there other factors to this that maybe I'm not considering? As always, any and everything, leave it down below. Fortunately, we don't have to wait too long to find out, right? Gamescom is in less than a month. As is usually smart, though. It's good to keep your expectations low, and then, just maybe, we'll be pleasantly surprised. That's all I've got for this one, though. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.